This is the Fog of War timeline presentation, and first off we're going to begin in October 1962 with the Cuban Missile Air Crisis. So basically what had happened was Cuba wanted to have a nuclear war on a bunch of places like New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Washington, Mexico City, and they were all in the U.S.
The reason why the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred was because the Soviet Union were building missile sites in Cuba. This had seemed like one of the most important confrontations in the Cold War. But keep in mind, this was the closest the USA and Cuba came to a nuclear war.
The Cuban Missile Crisis ended in 1962 after the superpowers reached an agreement ending the nuclear war. Khrushchev agreed to take down missiles in Cuba and ship them back to the Soviet Union.
Now on to the Vietnam War in 1955.
The Vietnam War happened when the North Vietnamese government and Viet Cong were fighting to reunify Vietnam. Later on, forces from France and the U.S. had to intervene. During the Vietnam War, all of it was a direct result of the First Indochina War between France, which claimed Vietnam as a colony, and the communist forces then known as Viet Minh. In 1973, a third Vietnam War began, but without the U.S. involvement.
How the Vietnam War ended is Nixon did decrease American troops' strength in South Vietnam, but the fighting continued. Under the provisions of the Accords, the U.S. forces were withdrawn. However, this did not end the war for the Vietnamese, and the fighting continued until April 1975 when Saigon fell to communists. The last topic we'll be talking about is the Soviet-Afghanistan War.
This war had lasted over 9 years. There were groups known as Mujahideen as well as smaller Maoist groups, which fought a war against the Soviet Army and the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan.
What happened between the war is that there was always conflict between Afghan communists and anti-communist Muslims. This is where the Soviets intervened by bombing rural areas.
The U.S.-led coalition in Afghanistan, which ended its combat mission, marking the formal end to the longest war in American history.